Start off then by introducing myself. My name is Chris Strand. I work for the University of Minnesota Extension SNAP Ed program, and I am a health and wellness coordinator with the SNAP Ed program. So basically that just means that's a fancy way of saying a teacher or educator. So I've been coming here to the Empower program for a few years now.
Three and a half.
Three and a half years to be exact.
Since the program began.
Yes, and so it's been a real pleasure to be here to do this, and I'm glad we can also now offer an online option for people that can't attend, because as any of us know, over this past week and what will come, I think, next week, it's going to be that deep freeze weather where you're just thinking, I don't want to go anywhere and do anything if I don't have to. So I appreciate those of you that did attend here in person, and anyone that's also a part of our online option too. So I offered up a subject to Diana, and I said, I'd like to talk about sodium in our food. And I said, can you think of a way to put that into a message for people so they know what we're talking about? And she came up with sodium, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I thought that's pretty appropriate, because there's a lot of things people think of when they hear sodium. And I just wonder if some of you could just share what comes to mind for you when you just hear about sodium as it's related to food. Salt, right? So sodium and salt. Noodles, pastas. Okay, is it because it's what? In there? It's high, low? What would you say if you had to guess? Sodium and those things. It's made out of it. It's in there? Uh-huh. Anybody else have like an immediate thought when it comes to if I just mentioned sodium in our food? Actually, it could be in food, but mostly food.
I was going to say specifically one of the easiest ones to go to is Top Ramen. It's so sodium rich, and all you want is salt, and I don't know why it draws me specifically to it, but like this sodium rich like meal is so dumb and so not nutritious, but we are drawn to it. So yeah, so help me out.
So Chris mentioned, he said Top Ramen. So has anyone in this room ever had ramen noodles before? Just curious. I'm raising my hand too. I've had them many times. And it's very appropriate that you mentioned that too, Chris, because when we get to the food part of the day, we are actually going to incorporate ramen into a dish we're going to make. So, but we'll get to that later. That'll just be the cliffhanger for people of how we're going to fit something that's kind of has a bad reputation for being less than healthy, and what can we do with those foods other than just not take them or throw them away if we get them. So sodium, I heard someone say sodium and salt together. So everyone probably has an idea of what salt looks like. We just call it table salt. It's what's in a shaker at a restaurant. At home, you might have it in maybe even like a grinder with larger salt crystals, but essentially it's like a white crystal ingredient that we put into our food or on top of our food. But actually salt and sodium are not the same thing. Salt is a combination of two things, one of them being sodium, but the other is called chloride. And they're just basically elements that we find naturally in our world that we put together, and we created what we know as table salt. So it's two things put together. Sodium plus chloride equals table salt, what you find in the shake. And essentially, one crystal, or I should say one molecule of salt has 60% sodium plus 40% chloride. That's what you have in essence, when you put salt in your food or in something you're making. So it isn't exactly the same, but for the most part, when we talk about salt in our food, sodium comes up. And many of you we'll get to this, but many of you have probably looked at a nutrition label and you've seen sodium as one of the things mentioned. So it's measuring specifically how much, not chloride, like I said, sodium plus chloride is what we have for what we call table salt. We don't measure chloride on a nutrition label because it's not really something of importance to our health. whereas sodium definitely is. And that's what we're going to get to, especially because it's called Sodium and Your Health, which is the handout that I gave to all of you. So the reason why salt is so prevalent in our food goes back a long, long time, hundreds of years. The reason why it was initially used by people in relationship to food was it preserved food. So there were times before people actually had refrigerators, and they said, how are we going to keep this food from going bad over the winter, right? We can grow our food and eat it as it becomes ripe, but we want to keep some of this food so we don't starve in the winter. And so what they found is that putting salt or salt mixtures, so salt plus water, that's called a brine, and that's like early canning type things, those preservation methods were how salt came into our food initially. Now, most of you probably have heard you have taste buds on your tongue, right? So there's specific parts of your tongue, if you didn't know, that when certain types of flavors hit, that's when you get that sensation of something. So when salt, we perceive it as salty, there are certain parts of your tongue that are receptors for salt or saltiness, right? We also have sweetness. Does anyone know the others, by the way, if you've heard? Taste buds, different kinds of taste buds you might have. Yep, salt, sour. I said sweet. Yep.
Bitter.
Bitter. And there's one more. Yep, savory or umami. So those are kind of the same thing. So when you say something feels rich, like it's a rich flavor, like savory flavor, if you've heard that word too, savory, that's what umami means. It's the same thing. So we have these receptors. So it's also something that our tongue is built in to have as a flavor that we recognize, and most of us, to some degree, probably like when we recognize salt. If it's too salty, obviously, we don't have a positive reaction to that, but if we get the right amount of seasoning or salt on there, it's pleasing to us because we have those taste buds on our tongue for that. So in addition to that mixture that we have, what we call table salt, we got sodium plus chloride. You can actually mix sodium with other things too, and it doesn't form a crystal like we have salt. So on that first sheet called Sodium in Your Health, it's also sodium is mixed with other things as well. And that's put into our food again for preservation means. So we don't necessarily want it to give us a salty flavor, which is what sodium and chloride together, table salt, gives us. Sometimes sodium is mixed with things like nitrogen or oxygen, and that will just be a preservation version of sodium. Don't forget to sign the sheet. Sign the sheet, yep. But as the years passed and we started to develop refrigeration methods, we still used salt for preservation. So if you go down to that chart, if you want to see, this is the bottom of that first page. There's a little chart telling you why sodium is added to foods. So I mentioned for preservation, right? It's also for these other reasons here. And so I'm just going to say them out loud for those that are online. So sodium is also added to foods to enhance flavor. So if you didn't know, the reason why salt does this is not something I actually understand necessarily. I just know that when it's added to foods, if you have a flavor, like let's just say you have something that has what we're calling an Italian flavor. We'll call it, say it's spaghetti sauce. Salt can be added to, say, spaghetti sauce to enhance what you perceive as an Italian flavor. Basil, oregano, what other flavors are in Italian? There's probably some other ones I'm missing.
Yeah.
Oregano, basil, parsley, cilantro maybe. So when you've created something, especially if you're buying it from, say, and you're not making it from scratch, but this works for that too. But you go to the store, you buy spaghetti sauce. Salt is added to that so it can enhance that Italian flavor. It seems like it's a stronger, more flavorful sauce when they add salt because it enhances flavor. That's one of its properties. It's also used to cure meat. So has anyone in here ever hunted, got their own meat, cured, or just cured their own meat? Anyone ever done that before? I don't have. You've cured meat before? Yep. So what was your experience curing meat? It's just. Okay,
They basically told me, okay, put salt water in there.
right. Yep. So that's helping to cure. I'm just losing my train of thought of what curing is exactly. Like if I was to define it, I know it's used to, I think it's to keep, I mean, it's part of it's probably to reduce the possibility of like foodborne illness. Is curing is part of it, but I think also as part of it is to keep the moisture in the meat,
Yeah.
right? That's curing, right? You want, that's what salt. So salt is binding to the liquid, I think, in the meat, and that's what curing is doing. Is it saying don't let it evaporate, hold it inside that meat so it's juicier when you cook it. Okay.
Like brine
Wow.
turkey
I-
breast. It's usually for that reason.
Can you say that one more time? Can you say that one more time?
Right. And yep, and so we have another use for salt, right? It's also used to thicken food. I can't think myself of if I've done that, but it could be maybe in more in food manufacturing, I'm not sure, but to thicken food. It's to keep foods moist. Maybe that's connected to the curing, and but also just in other ways. And then for baking as well, we use it in baking, right? Salt is typically it's used in that process of baking items. So, but if I were to ask this question of everyone, is salt inherently bad for people to eat? Oh, I hadn't heard that. So salt can help put out a grease fire. So if you just had like say like a handful and you could just throw it on, or like a bag of salt. Yep. And to kind of choke, you're choking the flames probably or something. Probably, because it doesn't. I'm assuming it doesn't burn. Oh, that's a fun fact. So, salt is not inherently bad for people, and that's because salt actually has a function in our body. So we actually couldn't survive without sodium in our body as a part of our structure. Well, diabetics typically can't have carbohydrates, and salt is not a carbohydrate. So it could probably, yeah. So not that salt wouldn't have an impact because of what else might be in the foods or drinks that they're having, but salt would just by itself, right? Like salting your food typically wouldn't create a problem for a diabetic unless they have other conditions other than diabetes that salt could make worse. Like, for example, if someone has heart disease and they're a diabetic, those two things could coexist in someone, and salt could make the heart disease worse, and that could then in turn affect their diabetes. So those things could be connected for those people. But if it, okay, so that's, yeah, so salt would not be necessarily just a bad thing for a diabetic to have. But, go ahead, sorry.
Chris, I've got a question for you.
Oh, just a second, Chris. We have another question in the room that we're gonna. Okay, sorry. Right. So just to back up, before I get to your question, Chris, I'm going to say, so inside our bodies, we know we're all made up of what are the tiniest parts of our bodies? Does anyone know? Like, if you were to break it down, like think of it as like a, you know, what makes up you in the smallest pieces?
Starts with a C.
Cells, right? So every part of your body, from your hair to your toenails to your skin to all the internal, they all are made up of cells. The cells aren't all the same. That's why hair isn't the same as skin, isn't the same as like your heart, right? But they're all made up of these tiny pieces of us called cells. And every one of those cells needs sodium inside it. And the reason what sodium is needed for is you have this wall of the cell that that basically needs the inside of it protected. Think of it as like a sphere or a ball. And what's inside has to do its job, and you have to have the integrity of the outside, the wall, not break apart, not be pierced. So sodium helps, it goes back and forth between what's outside the cell and inside to keep that cell wall from breaking or from being basically invaded or for something inside going out. So sodium is constantly going back and forth between the wall of the cell because it's that small of an ingredient, or I should say a component of our bodies. So we need sodium actually just to survive, right? It's that important to our bodies that we have sodium inside every cell in our body. Now, the way that relates though to our food is we only need a certain amount of it, right? To maintain what I just mentioned, and that's for our cells. Now, we obviously know that sodium exists outside our bodies. We can make it, we can put it on our food. Does anyone know where salt comes from, by the way? Like when you have it in your shaker, it comes from somewhere, a factory. But before even the factory, does anyone know where they get salt from? Salt rocks, they mine it. So think of any kind of like, we have a lot of mines around here that mine ore, right? To make taconite or whatever. But they also have salt mines, and the salt mines are actually they're harvesting salt from the earth to make into salt that we use in food.
And what about sea salt, as Damien mentioned?
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that.
From
So
the sea.
yeah, so from the sea, that's more of a new area of where we can get salt from, is just from the water that's in the oceans or any salt water. And they can, again, extract the salt from that, or the sodium, the salt, I should say. And that is also used. So you might have, sorry, Chris, I'd forgotten all about your question.
Sorry. No, no. Don't worry about my question. I'm good. I'm loving every minute of this. So
in the discussion. So did you have something though you wanted to ask the Chris or say?
Nope. I just
Okay.
want to keep watching you do your magic.
Okay, so we obviously know that we can put salt from a shaker on our food, right? That's why it's present at almost every table in a restaurant. And we have it in our shakers at our home. We can put it on top of our food to, again, we're enhancing flavor, like I mentioned. We're also trying to hit our level of satisfaction that's maybe coming from our taste. So those taste buds and what we perceive as a good amount, right? A pleasurable amount of salt is why we would add that. So as we go to where our food comes from the outside of what we add to it, the majority of the sodium we intake as human beings do not come from shakers. So it doesn't come from us adding it, or someone at a restaurant adding it maybe as they prepare our dish we ordered. It's coming from the manufacturers that make things that we eat, right? Prepackaged foods, whether that's, well, you can see on that second page, I'm just going to hold this up. There's a little bit of like, it's a circle with kind of, it's like broken in the middle. So the top sources of sodium you can see is part of that little broken circle graphic, right? So at the top, I'm just going to read these, a few of these. Pizza, bread and rolls, so cold cut or cured meats, soup, sandwiches, such as cheeseburgers, snacks, such as chips, pasta, and things that have pasta mixed in, like spaghetti with sauce. Mexican mixed dishes, such as burritos, tacos, and then a lot of our heavily processed meats, like our nuggets, patties, tenders, and then from cheese. So those are kind of the major sources where we find it in the North American or the American diet. Now, it says there, 57% from all other foods and 43% from that list. So 43%, almost half of the sodium that we intake is coming from just these foods, right? And there's some common things to these and some that aren't so common, but they're all a processed form of food. Some what I would consider heavily processed, right? Meaning that they're very different from the ingredients that they had grown to make the thing that we're eating. Now, it doesn't have drinks in here, and there are some saltier drinks, but not a lot, which is not considered part of the top 10. I'll say this too. If you look on the left side, there's a salt shaker. with some numbers. It says 25% of the sodium that we get as people is coming from naturally occurring, which means it's inside something that we're not processing. So let's just say it's in, let me think, what would be a good example of something naturally occurring? Well, okay, from adding it from our salt shakers. Oh, sorry. That's okay. Yeah. And this is this front sheet too. Yep. And so basically not from the processed foods, only 25% of it, but a whopping 71% of our sodium intake is coming from salt or sodium being added that's not even in our control, meaning it's put in at the factory level. So we got our pizzas and our soups and our snacks and just the pasta. We talk about cheese that we buy, that's typically, it's already made, right? We're not adding salt to that. So 71% is added from there. But I had just mentioned that salt and the component of salt, I'm sorry, I back up. Sodium is something our body needs, and it's an essential nutrient. And it's also known as a mineral. So if you've ever heard of someone say vitamins and minerals are good for us in our foods, right? Vitamins and minerals. So salt broken down into sodium and chloride, those are minerals. So if you've ever heard of that phrase, eat foods with a lot of vitamins and minerals. So sodium is one of those, right? It's just that sodium is one that has a downside to it. So today, Diana came up with the name sodium, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So there's the good. It's essential for our bodies. We need it to survive. So we can't think of it as something we can eliminate, because it wouldn't be good to have no salt intake at all. We actually need it to sustain the amount that our bodies need for those cells. The bad is that a lot of our foods, unbeknownst to us, are full of sodium, way more than we need, our bodies need. And so there's that, we can't undo what's in the foods that we're buying from the grocery store if it's already in those foods, right? If it's already in a package, a jar, a bag, a box, we can't take it out. There's no way to rinse it off or cut it off. It's in there already. So that's the bad. And the ugly can be, what if we have too much? What would be the results of having too much? So I heard someone talk about how you can have foot swelling. So does anybody know, when you have sodium in your body that you've consumed, there is an effect that it does to us. So swelling feet, but back it up a bit and think, if anyone knows, what does sodium do when you have like something very salty? What is it doing that causes? So everyone can think of our body as having this road map of blood vessels, right? We have veins and arteries. When sodium hits your body, it goes down to your stomach and it's absorbed, right? And goes into your blood. Oh, we have, another joiner. Yep. So, yeah, so welcome. And so essentially, once the sodium hits your blood vessels, think of your blood vessel as like just a tube, right? It's a tube, or like, say, maybe like a garden hose. Everyone probably has used a garden hose to water something in their lifetime, right? Or seen someone else do it, okay? So what sodium does to that tube is it causes it to shrink, to kind of get tense and shrink. So what you have is a smaller space for blood that we have to get all over our body all the time, right? All of those cells, they need fresh oxygen. So as we breathe in, the air comes in, the oxygen gets pulled out of our lungs, goes into our blood, and then that oxygen that our body needs is picked up by other cells that are carrier cells, and that needs to get to the top of our head, to the bottom of our feet. We need oxygen all the time. And so we basically need that process to continue, right? And so if we have sodium coming in, we have this artery that now is being pinched. It's being pinched. So who's ever put their thumb on the end of a garden hose because they wanted to spray somebody? I've done that, right? And it's because you're limiting the amount of space that the same amount of water wants to go through. So instead of this space, you put your thumb on it and you have a little gap. Now it's coming up much harder, much stronger, which is why you can spray people with it. If you just took your thumb away, it just falls down. That's the average amount of pressure that we need to get blood from our heart, the pump, to all parts of our bodies. But when you put your thumb over essentially too much sodium in your body, It's like putting a thumb over your arteries. It's pinching it to the point where now your heart really has to work to get it into that smaller space because it still has to do its job. But that means the engine, we'll say, of your heart has to work that much harder. So sodium has an effect by doing that. And then once time passes, it starts to kind of relax again, right? When no more sodium's been added and the initial salt hit of a meal is over, then your blood vessels will go back. So when you have indefinite amount of pinched blood vessels, do you know what that's called? That's actually a medical condition. Yep, hypertension or high blood pressure. And just like that thumb over the garden hose, now the blood vessel is no longer relaxing. It's like the thumb is there all the time. So that means that your heart always has to work harder. There's no relax time for it because those vessels are always tense and they have a smaller space for the blood to go through. Hypertension, right? And so what can happen in the person that has over a period of time too much sodium in their diet is that whole thing of where the sodium from a meal hits you and then it tenses out the blood vessel. And then the assumption is that it's going to go back to being relaxed again. And that's okay, right? Between meals, what happens over time is the blood vessels don't relax. It's like it's too much. It's like it gets stuck on tense mode, that hypertensive, that high blood pressure mode. And what you're left with is what is called by a doctor hypertension or high blood pressure that you have to have treated. So some of us, right, just because of our family history, have a higher risk of that developing, right? So if you know your family histories at all, you might say, yep, I know my parents or one of my parents or an uncle or my grandparents or et cetera. Maybe you have a sibling that has high blood pressure. And that could mean that sodium affects you more than it would someone that doesn't have that family history. But that doesn't mean that because you don't have a family history that you can't develop high blood pressure. You can. And so that's just depending on how much sodium you have that you're intaking on a daily basis. And then its effect over time. So if you as a 16-year-old ate fast food every day, all day, all these processed foods had sodium content through the roof, you may not say, hey, I don't have hypertension because it's not common. What happens is over time. So that's why hypertension starts to develop. Sometimes people in their 40s, but typically it's going to be like 50s and 60s, sometimes younger, depending on the family history. But hypertension, high blood pressure could happen earlier, but by and large, it's usually 50s and 60s is when it starts to show up. But that's because of a lifetime worth of having a lot of sodium in the diet. Now, can that be reversed once it's kind of stuck? Well, doctors do say that reducing your sodium intake does over time undo the effect, but it isn't like if you stopped having sodium for a week that you're okay again. You have to basically keep on a steady diet of low sodium over a long period of time, again, years, to undo maybe what could have been 20 years of high sodium intake, okay? Which is why the first thing a doctor would say for someone with high blood pressure is, let's cut the sodium in the food, okay? So does anyone have any idea how much is considered the right amount? So there's like an average amount for an adult. Well, how much salt you should have in a day? And again, salt I'm saying and kind of mixing with sodium together. Because remember, salt is two things together, sodium plus chloride. We're not worried about the chloride, so sodium is what we're worried about. How much is the average ceiling or max amount that we should have? Any idea? So they have done a lot of research on this. Okay, so I have some measuring spoons here. And so the amount, it does say, and I'm going to find the right amount here because I don't actually have it memorized. Can someone help me? Can they look and see where it might have said what the
200 milligrams?
1800 is the average.
right there? Oh, yep. Okay.
Mhm.
Right. And so for an adult, though, I'm sorry, this is actually set up to be for a child of 6 to 18. So for an adult, I believe it's 2,300 milligrams, so 2,300 milligrams, if I remember correctly. But who is going to be able to measure that if they're given that number? Okay, that isn't a number that works for people if they're trying to find out how much they're having. Well, it's the amount that would fit in this spoon. Actually, this is the tablespoon. I should get it's the teaspoon. It's not the tablespoon. Boy, here's my teaspoon. Okay, so can everyone see how small an amount this is that would fit in this little spoon? That's the amount of sodium you should have in a day. That's the amount that you need to basically sustain the amount you need to go. So anything above this is going to be contributing to that effect potentially of high blood pressure, right? So, but now that we know this, and that sure to me doesn't seem like very much, you could put that much on one meal, right? What could come out of a shaker that could fill up this little
Yeah, so
teaspoon?
how much would it translate to an actual salt? It's a tablespoon of sodium, not a tablespoon of salt.
Right. So, like I said, 60% of salt is sodium.
Oh.
So it would be more than this. You're right.
So like
Because if
double,
this
but
is
it's still
just,
minuscule.
it would be more than this. Let's say we even upgrade it because of that. We upgrade it to this spoon, right? Because three of those equals one of these. That's tripling the amount, but even this much in a day still kind of seems small. Like I could, if you're a person who likes to salt your food, you could probably do this in a day, more than this in a day. I'm just talking about people that salt before they eat. And I know people that do that. I'm not one of those people, but I also was given this advice from a doctor a long time ago, and it stuck with me that, okay, I just won't salt my food unless I taste it first. That's one of those rules, right? You taste your food and then you say, does it need it? And then you add it. Okay. So, but now that, let's just say we know this, right? Even this is hard to know because we're eating food all the time that doesn't have, you can't see it in the food. You're not like able to scoop it from the food and see that. Okay. Because much of our food is not likely going to be homemade from scratch. I can probably safely assume that, right? That people are not having more of their food completely from scratch ingredients versus something that's pre-made for you in some way. Whether you heat it up in a microwave or just pop something in the oven or you grab it at a restaurant, more food is probably eaten that way on average for just an American than not. And that's where, of course, we're going to find more of our sodium in our food. But so what does that mean? How can we determine what's in our foods? We have information at our fingertips that we may or may not use. So what would you say? If I were to challenge you to say, how would you know how much sodium you had today? Do you think you could figure it out? Or what would you do if I challenged you to figure that out? So, right. So obviously the amount you add to your food, you choose to add, you could measure out and say, I'm going to limit it. I'm going to cut it in half, or I'm at least going to find out how much I'm putting in by putting it in a spoon, measuring it in some way, right? You'd be even just to eyeball it and guess it by saying that's how much I should have in a day. And then you start to kind of think about it. That's one way, but think of all the other, remember that's about, maybe not for everyone, but like 25% of your intake is from this. So that means 75% of your sodium is coming from other places other than you adding it to your food. So what would you do if I were to challenge you to measure the amount of sodium you had today or tomorrow, starting tomorrow with the first thing you ate until you went to bed? What could you do? Where could you find information? Hint, it's on one of these sheets. Nutrition labels, right? Nutrition labels are on every product that's sold packaged at a grocery store or sold at a convenience store. And that nutrition label is required by law to be accurate. So unlike sometimes the packaging tells you something is like, it's healthy, it might even use the word healthy. It might have pictures that could be considered misleading, right? But nutrition facts are the one thing that has to match, or the company making a food, if they have faulty nutrition facts, can actually have the ability to sell their product revoked. They can have their product pulled off the shelves. So they consistently have to be proving that their nutrition labels match what's in their food. Okay. So that's where I go to say how much sodium is in what I'm having. Okay. So you see on those two nutrition labels, this is meant to feature two different kinds of popcorn. One is air popped, no butter, no oil used. And the other one is popped in oil and is butter. Okay. You can see the difference of what's circled below, where you have the popped in oil and butter version, 200 milligrams. And that also equates to, go to the right, that's 9%. So remember how I told you 2,300 is the amount of milligrams we should have max for a day? There's 200 out of 2,300, but that's, now we're getting into math territory. I like the percentages instead, because I should know that what should the max percent be if I'm doing my add ups over the day? Everything I eat should add up to 100% and not more if I want to hit that max and not go over. So if you have, maybe I'll just ask you this. As you look at the nutrition label on the left, the popcorn, the one that's popped in the oil and butter, how much is a serving size? Can you find that part of the nutrition label? It's there. You just have to find where it says serving size and it's near the top. Yeah, 208 G, 2 cups, right? Those are the same thing. So 208 grams is the same as 2 cups. So can you imagine what measuring cups look like? The biggest of the measuring cups, that's 1 cup. So think of putting popcorn kernels in there until it's full, and full at the top, not overflowing. 1, put it into a bowl. Now you do it 2 times, and think that is what they're calling 1 portion. Okay, so you have the same reaction that most people do, is that's not enough for what we're going to eat. Okay, so that's one thing to remember too. So when they tell you you're having 2 cups, 1 serving of our popcorn, that's 9%, almost 10. Let's just average up to 10. That's 10% of your sodium for the day from those 2 cups. Now let's just say, what would be a realistic amount of popcorn to have? Instead of those 2 measuring cups full, what if you made one of those microwave bags? How many times do you think those would fill up 1 measuring cup about this tall and about that round? How many times do you think you'd fill it up? Do you have a guess, Diana?
I guess 6.
Let's just say it's 6.
6 cups total,
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 servings.
Okay, yeah, and we all know what those look like, right? The microwave bags you put in, and then it pops up, and then you rip them open. Okay, let's say it's 6. You can fill up a cup 6 times. That's 3 times the amount of popcorn that you're going to have if you eat the entire bag, and that's not that unlikely. People do that all the time. At work, I work, and people have that, and that's what they have in the middle of the day. That's not even a meal. That's their snack between lunch and dinner before they leave for home. So 3 times the amount of salt you're getting too, though. So now you're doing that 9% times 3. That's 27%. Okay, that's just from that 1 bag of popcorn. Okay, and that's not. And then think of it as like, just say for example, that was your snack between lunch and dinner. Okay, that's 27% of the salt. If you're trying to only reach 100, not more, what other places might you have gotten some sodium from? Well, let's look what's here at the bottom. See here at the bottom of that second page, where you have the percent, the circle that's with the line through it. It's kind of grayed out at the bottom. That's putting together an average day that somebody might have. Now look at the foods, and again, it might not be something you like, right? But let's just look and see what we have there. We have breakfast, lunch, snack, and dinner put down there, okay? And then it says, what are we having? For breakfast, we're having a bowl of cereal, skim milk, and a banana. Well, that might be a meal that you'd say, that wouldn't be my breakfast. I'd have something way different than that. But that, just that, is 281 milligrams, okay? Remember, that's 281 out of our 2,300. So that's not that much for a meal. 281 is pretty low. So the cereal, the milk, and the banana, does anyone have any guesses? Where do you think the sodium from that meal is coming from? All 3 of them? 1 of them? 2 of them? What do you think? Where would sodium be found in cereal, milk, and a banana? That's okay. This is probably stuff maybe people have never even looked into before. And I didn't until I learned it, right? Until I learned what it was and what happens to our bodies when we have sodium. I didn't know these things either. I didn't think of measuring it or learning more about it. And so from cereal, milk, and banana, almost all of that 281 milligrams is coming from the cereal. Okay. Milk has almost no sodium added to it. It's just from the cow. Some of it is, it's there, it's naturally occurring in the cow's milk, but it's very, very low. And the banana also is very low in naturally occurring sodium. So it's from the cereal. And what's unique about the cereal is it's a processed food, right? Remember I said that processing food is where we're going to get more of our sodium from. But you're like, but the cereal I eat isn't sweet. But if you go back to the ways they can use it for preservation, if you mix sodium and chloride together, you can taste salt. You get a salty taste. If you can mix sodium plus oxygen or sodium plus nitrogen, you get a different compound and your tongue does not taste salt. So you can have salt and sodium in your food. I take it back. I'm mixing them up again. Sodium can be added to your food without it tasting salty. That's why cereal can be high. In fact, I'm just going to grab a box that I have. I brought it. I have more than one. Oh, these are kind of silly. This is granola, but yeah, you can have it as a cereal. So I'm just going to look at here and how much sodium. This has 200 milligrams from 2/3 of a cup. Now, no one would tell me that this cereal tastes salty to them, right? But that's where we get hidden sodium. It's used to preserve the food longer. It's going to hold on to the flavors or enhance the flavors that you have in here. So that's one of those sneaky ways that salt is used. And it's well, if this company knows that salt is not good for us, how come they aren't trying to find an alternative to do what sodium in the food is doing? Or why aren't they limiting the amount? What do you think it is that companies don't intentionally make their foods lower in sodium? Well, yeah, sodium is very cheap to do what it's doing in the food. And the reason that they don't lower the amount of sodium is because it's going to make them more money to use salt and sodium. So that's really the not trying to put the companies that make these foods down. It's just that they're not in the business of making us healthy. We need to be in the business of making ourselves healthy. So that's just one of those things that I, over time in looking at labels and things and kind of feeling like, how come this company isn't finding a better way to do what the sodium is doing if we know that too much sodium is bad for people? Well, again, it's something that's allowable to put in foods, and it doesn't have any maximum amount that this company has to adhere to. There's no law that says if your food goes over this amount of sodium, then you're in trouble. That isn't a thing. So in other words, we have to be the ones that safeguard our own amounts of food or the ingredients in certain foods that are potentially harmful to us. So on that breakfast, essentially that's where all of your sodium comes from when it's this plus milk plus banana. It's going to be coming from this and only this. Now let's look at lunch. You have turkey, sandwich, and chips. And that's 1,197 milligrams, much higher if that's what you're having. Now, obviously it matters what you're putting on your turkey sandwich. But let's say it's the meat and it's cheese and bread. Even if it's just that, which of those ingredients do you think is going to be contributing sodium between turkey meat, cheese, and bread?
And mayo.
Well, I wasn't even going to count mayo yet, but if it's just turkey, cheese, and bread, does anyone have any idea where's the sodium in that sandwich coming from? Turkey, if it's going to be, think about this. If you're buying it in the prepackaged sliced turkey, yes, that's going to be a cured meat, a lot of sodium, processed meat. If you're cutting off turkey from one that you did for Thanksgiving, if you're just shaving off turkey from what you had left over from Thanksgiving, very little sodium because that's coming from the actual bird. It didn't go through a factory, strip down of the meat, and then get processed and a bunch of stuff added to it. That's the difference between a turkey sandwich that has almost no sodium from the meat and one that has a huge amount of sodium, depending on where that meat's coming from. What about the cheese? Is that going to have some? Oh, we already said it. It's in the top 10. So cheese, almost all cheeses, unless it's manufactured specifically to be lower sodium, almost all cheeses are high in sodium. What about bread? Is bread? Well, bread is also in the top 10, right? So that sandwich and chips, well, let's go to our list again. Wow, everything from that lunch is on our top 10 list of most amount of sodium, right? The cured meat, the turkey, the cheese, the bread, and the chips, they're all in the top 10 of highest sodium foods, okay? So that's probably why that one, the lunch is going to be such a big spike in sodium. And then the snack is an apple and corn chips. And so there you're going to see 155, again, that's a low sodium snack. That's a good choice for snack, even though you do get some from the corn chips. I'm guessing that they're not having a lot of corn chips if it's only 153 milligrams, because we all probably have had corn chips at some point in our life. We know that they're salty. But then moving on to dinner, a cheeseburger and french fries. That's even higher than lunch, right? And that's going to be, again, coming from the cheese, the meat, the bread, and the french fries. That's going to be a high sodium, highly processed form of potatoes too. So potatoes by themselves, they're not high in sodium. It's what we add to our french fries, or what someone adds to it for us, we'll call it. So the cooking oil is going to have salt or sodium in it. And then the french fries are typically salted by a shaker at the restaurant before we can get to it. That's also where we're going to get some of that sodium too. So, and as you can see, the amount is 3,311. And I said 2,300 is like your max. So now we're already 1,000 milligrams over what's recommended for adults to have for a day. So now we have to think, what can we do now that we have this information? So we can use our labels. So what I was hoping that we would do is look for, I'm just going to hand out a couple things at each table, just to see if you can figure out, by using those nutrition labels, would you consider something to be high or low sodium? So I'm going to give you these measurements. 5% or less per serving is low sodium, and 20% or higher is considered high in sodium. Something that you need. Sorry. I already did that. How about here? Get that covered. But I'm going to give you both, okay? And I got one more here. I'm going to give you. So. Okay, so what I'm asking you to do essentially is find the nutrition fact label. Find the nutrition fact label. And then try to find on the nutrition fact label, where is sodium listed? So look for that word. And it's going to tell you a number in mg. That's a measurement in weight. But go to the right and look at the percent. And if it's 5% or lower, it's considered low sodium. For the serving size, remember that they're telling you. And if it's 20% or higher, that's high sodium. Okay, what is your product there? You got tea, right? Some kind of tea? I think it's unsweetened too, right? Unsweetened, yep. So unsweetened iced tea is, I'm sorry, what was your percent again? What was the percent of sodium? 0. So that's something to remember. Tea, it's not salty flavoring, but we also would know that it's even a sweetened version is likely going to be low in sodium too, because all they're doing is adding sugar, not sodium, when they sweeten the tea. Okay, so 0%. Does anyone have something higher than 0% on theirs? What do you have? 1%, and what food do you have there? It's 1%. And canned fruit, right? You wouldn't think of that as being a salty food, but remember, we already proved with the cereal, you can have sodium be relatively high, but not salty flavor, okay? And then the other one you have here was, what was the percent of?
7%.
Here's another example. So we have sweetened yogurt, vanilla flavored, and it comes in at a 7%, 160 milligrams. Who would think that vanilla yogurt would be high-ish in sodium? So I'm not saying it's high, but it's higher than our 5%. Remember, that's what I'm saying, 5 or lower, 5% or lower is low. This is higher than what I would have guessed until I had looked at this label. I would never think yogurt is not considered a low sodium food.
What's the serving size though? 'Cause that is a big container.
1 cup.
Oh, that's not one.
And that's the other part of it too, right? We'll get to that one, some of the higher sodium ones. So think of 1 cup, is that a good serving size for yogurt? For those of you that do like yogurt, think of a measuring cup. I would say I probably have more than a cup when I have yogurt, but maybe it's relatively close to what comes in a single serving size. That might be about a cup, like the kind you just tear the foil off and it's already got stuff mixed in it with the yogurt. Okay, so this was kind of a surprise to me that this one would not be considered low sodium, okay? And I have one in my hand here. Does anyone ever use these French fried onions? Usually they go on like green bean casserole for Thanksgiving. I like to put these sometimes on top of sandwiches or just in a casserole or whatever, right? So this one, again, what this is sliced onions that are fried, yes, in oil, but this is 2% of our daily sodium coming from this. And that's from 2 tablespoons of these. So this is how much I get for a serving. I get whatever will fill this up, and remember, it's not heaping, it's only what you can fit in the bottom part of that spoon. I know I have more than that when I add it to a dish, or maybe even a sandwich or something, right? But it's 2%, relatively low. And what did you have here on your cheese? 12%, okay? Would you have guessed that this was higher than low sodium, not considered low? Yeah, I already said that the things that are more like chips, snack kind of crackers are probably going to be higher. Now, the one thing I'll say is this gives you 18 crackers. So if you've ever had Cheez-Its before and you counted out 18, put them on a plate or in a bowl, is that a reasonable amount, do you think, if you're going to have these as a snack, 18? Maybe. So some people are saying yes, some people are saying no. But just remember, if you're unsure how much that looks like, if it's measuring in an amount, you're like, I'm not quite sure what that is. Look at this. How many servings are in the entire container? Meaning, how many times are you going to sit down and have these before it's gone? This says 9 times. You're going to have, if you had only their serving size, this would last you 9 times of having that snack. This isn't that big a box, right? I think if I was to really use this as a snack, 3 times, maybe, right? That I could see myself polishing this box, meaning I'm having 3 times the amount. And if I'm doing that, when I'm measuring my sodium, I have to take that number that you figured was 12, I have to multiply it by 3, right? Maybe I'm not having it over a day. Maybe I had half the box because I really went in today and I had half the box. If I did that, I have to take these numbers and you can see how it just starts to stack on itself, because even though the number is accurate, is the portion size that you're going to have reasonable? If it's not reasonable, then you have to do the extra work of saying, okay, I'm having more than 1 portion here. I had 3 portions worth. I have to take that number of sodium that I'm trying to watch, pretend we're watching sodium. Now I have to multiply it by 3. Now it's 36% of our sodium for the day was kind of taken up or spent by having this as a snack. So just to food for thought. So what about our pineapple chunks? 0. So just like our canned fruit cocktail, canned fruit is typically going to be low. Okay. And we already said what tea was. How about our
This one's ridiculous. This is 1/3 of a cup.
So if you think of not the big cup, you have to think of 1/3 of that measuring cup is a serving size. And it's, what was the percentage?
17%.
17%. So something like this is not going to be something you eat by itself. This is an Italian style breadcrumb. So you might have meat that you put into, say, like an egg wash, and then you're putting this on top and you're trying to get that crust around the meat or something, or you're adding it to a hot dish.
You gotta keep moving it.
Oh, sorry.
Quads.
Yeah, I tried my best to stay still, but I gotta move now. But, so this is just from that 1/3, or, yeah, 1/3 of a cup, it's 390 milligrams or 17%. So depending on how much you're taking into your day, we'll say 17%, just from what's coating something or what's mixed in as an ingredient into something bigger, this is a high sodium product for sure, or approaching high, depending on if we have more than that. So what else do we have here
Mine's
then?
3%.
3% was the,
Oats.
okay, so just oats, right? So we haven't done anything to it. It's still just dry oats. But if we add water to it, how much sodium's in water?
Nothing.
Well, it might have some.
There's a balance. yeah.
There's a naturally occurring amount that's in water that we have in our, pipes, right? Not coming from the pipes, but I mean, it's coming from the ground where we get it. Does anyone salt their water? Like soften their water? So you can get a significant amount of sodium if you are softening your water. And why do you soften your water? Well, it's to try to get your water to be easier to use. Maybe it's to make, like, for example,
I only salt my water only when I have hiccups.
okay, but I'm not talking even about obviously like adding it to every glass you're drinking, but if you have like a water softener in your home, it's adding salt to your water for the purposes of extracting minerals that make the water taste bad or look bad. And that's different, of course, than what we're typically thinking about, because we're using our water in our homes for a lot of different things, not just for drinking,
Yeah.
but it's washing our clothes and our.
Well, we have big bags that come to our hotel to like our water softener.
Right.
and
But that's
It
no
makes
different than the
salt.
salt, meaning like when it enters your body through drinking, right? It doesn't matter. Your body goes, oh, this is sodium. This is sodium, just like the sodium that's added to this yogurt for flavor or for
Do you think
preservation.
there's sodium in even outside salt?
In what? In
Outside salt? For,
outside
like,
salt?
doing the sidewalks and stuff?
Oh, yeah.
There's sodium
Mhm.
in there too?
Yeah, oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah, all
gonna have to
salts are
look
gonna
at
have
that.
sodium as a component, right? So we obviously don't eat sidewalk salt, but there is sodium in there too, right?
Yeah.
So sodium isn't necessarily just with food, it's just that it's sitting out there in nature all over the place. And so
They
at
use
some
them in,
point,
Solar farms too. Solar farms use sodium salt.
okay, yeah. So, and 240 milligrams for these crackers, and you get 15 of these, okay? And it says there's 7 different servings inside this kind of a small box, 7, okay? But it's saying 10% of your sodium comes from what they're calling 1 serving. So if you had 2 servings, that's 30 crackers. That's possible, especially now if you're having not just a cracker. What if you're putting a little square of meat? Yeah, you're doing like a little pepperoni or a salami piece and cheese. Now, can you imagine how much sodium is in having 15 of those? Think if you're making them into like those little, like a sandwich, right? You do 2 crackers, okay? And even if you had 10 of those sandwiches, you could easily, right? And then the final one was this oranges. I didn't have a good selection here. Sorry, I had 3 canned fruits, and they're gonna be low, 0%. But what I did bring, just for
There you go
comparison.
again, you're moving,
I know I'm
Chris.
moving, that's okay, but I gotta move. So I mentioned ramen, so could I just ask you
There
to
you go again.
look up, I know. Can I ask you to tell us about our ramen?
You can always pick up the laptop with this one.
Well, you got all those cords.
Yeah, right.
Move the camera. You're so smart.
Right here, I'll try my best to stay in frame, as they call it. So,
The first thing I'm noticing is that it's 1/2 of a package is the serving size, so you already have to double whatever numbers.
If
are
you have
because
one of
Nobody's gonna make 1/2 of a block of ramen.
right,
So it's 24% sodium, so that's 48% sodium just here.
so 50%, nearly 50% or half your day's sodium is from one of those. So has anyone ever made 2 of those at a time because that's what they're calling their meal? Has anyone ever tried 2?
I eat
Can you
more.
see what's happening? Is that why you're laughing?
No, she's laughing because she says she's fat. She eats like 3 packages and she can't.
Oh, you're a ramen fan?
I told her she's not fat,
But-
she's just fluffy.
The cups are even worse because you're leaching all that styrofoam in if you microwave it. But I'm
She might wear it. I'd recommend
supposed to
it.
add boiling water to it. But
So, I, as an early 20-something-ish, first time living on my own, trying to figure out how I'm gonna make my food that I don't really know how to prepare yet, because I hadn't figured out, I didn't have any cooking skills. I said, these are cheap and they're flavorful. So I would easily have 2 of these for a meal. Like, and say, that's my meal. I make 2 of these. So essentially just what I'm doing by having 2 of these and only 2 of these, that's all of my sodium for the day just in that one meal. Everything else is now above that 100% or max sodium, because just one of these is nearly half, 50% of your, and I'd have 2 of these. I don't think I'd usually have more than that in a day, but I would easily go for lunch, have this, and then maybe have a burger and fries for supper, which we already figured was, I mean, just in the guessing here, I think it's already like almost 1,700 milligrams. And that's the extra that's on top of the 100% that have already hit. So you can see how all of that stuff adds up. And then if you salt anything that you had for breakfast, maybe you had eggs or you had sausage or bacon, those are, again, those processed meats, that's going to be really high too. Depending, I could easily have probably topped 4,000 milligrams in a day from what I was eating at one time back in my life, right? And again, we only need 2,300, and I probably was going over 4,000. And that's where I'm talking about. If that's how it's going to be sustained, let's say you had that every day for 20 years, you would probably be very likely a candidate to get hypertension or high blood pressure, right? It's not guaranteed that it would take 20 years. Maybe for you, in your body chemistry, it'd take 40 years. But if you're someone that has a higher risk because of your family history, it might only take 15 years of eating like that before you could develop high blood pressure. You get 40 years old, 35 years old, you could get that. So, and that would be the, again, that's the ugly part of sodium, is when it becomes prolonged excessive intake of sodium, it could really lead to some serious things. So one of the things I know is mentioned in the final page, this isn't meant to be a scare tactic. That's not my thing. It's just more informational. So if you didn't know what hypertension, prolonged hypertension or high blood pressure can do to your body, what does it do? What are the effects? Now, before I say what they are, and you can read them too, what effects or what symptoms do people have when they have high blood pressure? Does anyone know? Like, what are the things you say, oh, you get this, this, and this if you have high blood pressure? You could be dizzy. You could feel like you can actually, like if you're,
Feel the impulse.
yeah, some people can feel they have high blood pressure because they actually feel the heart overworking. And so every heartbeat, they can kind of almost feels like a pulse. Like I know someone who, when they had high blood pressure, I could see them doing this. Like they say, do you realize that's happening to you? And they were so used to it, they didn't even know that I could see how hard the heart had to work. I could see their head twitch when every heartbeat. And it was scary because they didn't know. That's the hardest part about high blood pressure, hypertension, is that many people don't know because it's so slow. It's so slow over time. The beginnings of it, remember, is like you have high blood pressure and then your vessels relax. It's high blood pressure and then this, it relaxes. Over time, the relaxing is less often, and it's also, it doesn't go back to be its original open blood vessel. So it's staying, maybe it's half, tensed or pinched. Yeah.
When I think blood pressure, I think that's. I think my eyes, I think that's a really.
Well, okay. So I don't know for sure because again, I'm not a doctor, but I will say this. at the bottom, the picture of the body of this last page, there are 4 major effects of having prolonged high blood pressure. The first one that I always bring up is the heart, right? The heart that has to work harder because it has to push blood through a smaller tube. And then that means you're basically, think of an engine on your car that always has to drive uphill. How long do you think that car is going to last if it's only driving uphill as opposed to having some flat, some down in its life? If it's only driving uphill, that's like your heart working with against high blood pressure, okay? That engine isn't going to last as long. It's going to wear out faster. That's really how it works. So your heart still gets the blood where it has to go, but think of our lifespan and how long we want our hearts to last. You could like shave years and years off your heart if you don't have high blood pressure that's controlled somehow, or you even prevent it as best you can through your food choices. That's heart, but you also can have vision loss because of prolonged high blood pressure. So that means just like your heart has to work, there's blood vessels, remember, in your eye, there's blood vessels in your, wherever, right? They're everywhere, right? So because the blood vessels are they're so small and so tiny in your eye compared to like the ones that have to feed your body, like your arteries and your veins, the smaller blood vessels get hurt by the high blood pressure first. So that means that having the pressure be really high of the blood going through these tiny little eyeball vessels, you can get damage to them over time. And that's maybe what the dots could be, but I'm not.
It's right here.
Oh,
I
okay.
documented it. It
Okay.
said, when you see dots or spots in your vision with blood pressure, usually due to a condition called hypertensive retinopathy, where the high blood pressure damages the tiny blood vessels in the retina, the light sensitive tissue at the back of your eye, causing bleeding or fluid that appears as small dots or floaters in your vision. This is a sign that your high blood pressure is affecting your eyes and should be addressed medically and immediately.
So
So
That's-
disease of the retina.
yeah, retinopathy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's one of those consequences. Like it says, consequences of high blood pressure. And your kidneys also have much smaller blood vessels, and so that could mean that your kidneys can't handle the pressure either. And how important, if you're unaware, what do your kidneys do?
Filter.
Salt, you can't, like your body can't process water that has too high of a salt content, so it either take it, if the water is too salty, it takes water out of your body to dilute the salt, so it removes salt or, it removes salt.
So sodium, so you mentioned the bloating, right, of the hands and the feet, right, from too much salt. That's because sodium actually causes your kidneys, it pinches the blood vessels and it causes them to output less urine, right? It's holding on to more water. So it's not allowing the kidneys to function correctly and produce and get rid of the excess liquid in our bodies. Because we need, like, we have too much liquid in our bodies because we just had too much.
Overworking and not wanting to balance.
And your kidneys need to balance that out. Your kidneys need to say, you have too much liquid in here. We got to get some of this out so we can have an equal amount. Sodium in your body, too much sodium, causes your kidneys to hold back it slows down the kidneys. And so that means that the more liquid you take in, now those vessels are getting fuller and fuller. Now the pressure's up again. And the kidneys aren't doing their job of balancing out the amount of liquid you need in your body. So then you can have actual unique hypertension that are in your kidneys because of that. So there's hypertension in your blood vessels, but there's like a unique kind. I think it's just called renal hypertension. I think it's got its own name, where meaning like your body, your vessels here, they've calmed down, but it's still here. It hasn't gone out of your kidneys. So you can actually have hypertension that doesn't leave your kidneys when it does leave your blood vessels, like your heart vessels. So kidney, and you don't want kidney disease because it's a filter. Did you say filter, Diana? I think
Blood
you did.
filter, yeah.
It's a blood
Filters
filter,
blood.
meaning there's a lot of things that go through our bodies that need taken out because too much of it in our blood causes, it causes our blood to become toxic. And the kidney says, oh, I know what this is. You shouldn't have this. I'm going to grab this and we're getting rid of it. So the most prominent thing is when we eat meat, right? So most of us probably eat some form of meat, maybe, or protein. What happens when our bodies break down meat for energy, which is what we would be eating meat for because it's to nourish our bodies. The breakdown of meat turns into a byproduct of ammonia. So does anybody know what ammonia is? Ammonia is something you use. It's definitely not something we want to breathe in. It's toxic. Like ammonia is toxic for our bodies. We don't want to breathe ammonia. It hurts our bodies. So the unfortunate byproduct of actually, yes, breaking down meat produces ammonia. And your body, specifically your kidneys, say, we don't want that in our blood. That's toxic. That will hurt us. It grabs the ammonia and it converts it to what's called urea, which turns eventually into urine. Okay. So we mix that. So that's just something that I thought was fascinating, that we actually have a system in our body that produces ammonia by design that we have to get rid of through our kidneys. So it grabs the ammonia and it actually changes the structure of it inside the kidney, turns it to urea, mixes it with the excess water that we're trying to balance out, and that's what gets flushed out when we pass urine. So we don't want kidney disease, and so we don't want our kidneys hurt either. And luckily we have two of them, so in case we end up having an injury or an accident or something or disease in one, maybe the other one could help us out. Stroke is the final consequence. Does anyone know what a stroke is? I mean, it's showing it on the picture. You may have been able to read it, but you had a.
I don't know if that's the same. That's probably.
What is it called?
I said it had a heat
Oh,
stroke.
heat stroke. Yes, heat stroke is different, right? So they're using the same word stroke, but heat stroke is different. Yes. A stroke, as it pertains to high blood pressure, though, is when you have a clot or an occlusion, meaning it's like a blockage, but it's hurting your brain. It's in your brain. So your brain, of course, has all these blood vessels. You can have strokes that are caused in other parts of your body too, but essentially the stroke that we're talking about is going to be showing in the brain. It's basically high blood pressure. And why would high blood pressure contribute to strokes? So think about what it does again. It's taking the tube of a blood vessel, pinching it, so now it's smaller, and having a heart attack is typically because we have a clot, blockage somewhere. So if you have that tube smaller, isn't there more a chance that it's going to block, right? If you have a smaller tube, yes. So the stroke is the same thing. It's basically saying you're having the blockage happening up here instead of in your heart, where a heart attack would be. So that's just because, again, you can even see that. Here's that picture where I was talking about, right? The tube. The arrow is showing the distance between the top and the bottom, we'll say, of the blood vessel. The sodium is causing it to shrink. That arrow, it's causing the surface area to shrink. So now you have less possibility of a clot passing through. So that's why high blood pressure contributes to blockages, meaning heart attacks and strokes, is because we have less space for that clot potentially to pass through and not cause a problem. So that was a lot. And of course, we're almost 2:30 again. But this is what I'll say. I didn't have time. Well, I gave it out 2 months ago. That was when we were going to do this one 2 months ago.
Oh, Sarah might have gotten that one.
Right,
Yeah,
so-
I'll have to look back.
What we were going to do, and we can do this next time if you're interested. Maybe you can almost give me an idea if this would be something you want to do. We were going to make up a couple of ramen packages, but we were going to add some things to it, kind of taking something that's standard high sodium food, but we were going to do like a transformation, or what's another word? It's kind of a newer word, but you like a hack, like a way to.
Not have the seasoning in it.
Yep, so inside here is the noodles plus the packaging. We were going to throw the seasoning package away, and we were going to instead create a sodium-free version of the flavoring packet. So there you can do different versions or copycats of these flavors, but what you're using instead of the flavoring packet that they provide, you can use your own mixture of sodium-free seasoning. So there was a mixture that we were gonna do that combines, basically, it was to copy the, if you've ever had the Oriental flavor. I think that was like, it's like the dark blue packaging, I think. There's a way to create that version of it by using onion powder, ground ginger, yeah, onion powder, garlic powder, and pepper. So essentially, you just combine these in the right amounts and you get essentially the same flavoring, which you've cut out all the sodium from that packet. And then I just brought some other ones. If someone wanted some heat, I brought some chili powder. But what's great about these, I'll just say this is my final kind of message is, there's ways to remove sodium from your foods without taking away all the flavor. You can get a lot of flavor from these kind of spices without saying, where did all the flavor go? Because that is possible, that if you were to go to like a low sodium diet, that you would get to a point and say, okay, I miss something. This doesn't taste the same, doesn't taste as good. So the balancing out could be is that you try to find ways like what we were going to do today, and that's to have something similar to what you're used to having and like, but making it in a different way. And this way would have been just using, again, sodium free. So just remember that. Not that all of these are sodium free. Obviously, if you see the one that's called onion salt, there's one of these you can see in that spice section called onion salt. There's salt in there. Yes, there's sodium in there. But by and large, these are all sodium free, meaning you can add more. If you really like that ginger flavor, you like the garlic flavor from garlic powder, you can add more if you want. And you don't have to feel like, uh-oh, how much? Is this going over my limit? You could have more of it because you can do that without being concerned of sodium, because there's no sodium in there to be had. And then the other final thing is canned vegetables. I'm always saying to people, if fresh is not within your budget, and for a lot of people, they're like, you can tell me go have fresh vegetables and they're great for me, too expensive. I can't find them at my store, if I even can find them. That's a real situation for a lot of people. And then I can say, well, what about frozen? You'd say, well, yeah, they have some frozen vegetables, but they don't have everything I want. And maybe even they're too expensive too. So then the cheapest version is typically going to be a canned vegetable, right? And these last a lot longer. You can usually buy them in bulk and keep them for days where you don't want to go shopping. You can, you don't have to worry about the fresh. It's going to spoil, cost more, harder to get. Frozen, you probably run out of space. Maybe in your freezer, you can't buy, maybe that's at a premium for you. Maybe you don't have a lot of freezer space. And you're like, I can't just go buy a bunch of freezer packs of vegetables because I don't have space. Canned vegetables are much easier to store. You don't have to worry about it, right? As long as they're at somewhat room temperature, you can put them anywhere you have space for them. But the thing about it is, a lot more of these canned vegetables you're going to find are higher in sodium. And it's because they use it as a cheap preservative. So what's in the can won't make you sick. But they use salt, water, sodium to make these, the food inside stay fresher and not spoil. So what can you do with these? If I'm recommending that you have these because they're more affordable and they're still going to give you the nutrition of vegetables, but you're also telling me that there could be a lot more sodium in here. What you can do is you can actually rinse the contents of this. So if you were to take this, put it into a strainer, you don't have a strainer, you just cut the top off, keep the lid connected to it, pour water in it, and just shake it up. Get rid of the inside salt water, the brine, then add tap water to it, shake it up, rinse off what's inside. You've already cut about 40% of the sodium that would have been in this can of corn. So you're not getting rid of all of it, because some of it is inside the corn, yes. Some of it got soaked up and it's inside the kernel. You can't really get it out. But you can rinse off the outside of it, and that would mean a lot less sodium and still get the benefit of that. Obviously, when you have foods that kind of come in almost like its own juices, which this does, it's a little bit harder, especially if it's like a flavored one. Yep, you're going to rinse some of the flavor down the drain when you rinse off, say, canned tomatoes that have a Italian seasoning, but these aren't. Or even something like this. Because does anyone know what does canned spinach look like when you open it up? It's tougher to rinse, is I'll say that. You can still put it in the strainer or the colander and rinse it. You still could, yes. But not every vegetable though is as easy to rinse as others. Green beans, peas, corn, a lot of vegetables are really easy though. You just, you could use even the spray gun if you have one at your kitchen sink, put it in the strainer or even in the can. And again, 40% of that sodium's gone. But just so you know too, always look at your labels, because I thought, well, they're probably all going to be the same when I started looking at these. Corn, tomatoes, it's all going to have about the same amount. This has, I'm just going to look at that percentage again. Again, this serving size is only half a cup for this, and that's 13% of your daily sodium is from half a cup of this. But that's when it's unwashed. So again, you can cut about 40% from that serving size if you did that. So that's 12%. This one is only 8%. So they're not the same. So it isn't that all canned vegetables are made the same with the same amount. It depends, again, what is the vegetable inside, how much of the salt gets inside this kind of a vegetable is going to determine how much of it is retained when you eat it. This one here, though, I was really surprised. This one is 13%. That's right. This one has that label like you had, where you had the half of a package and the entire thing. So if you were to eat this entire can of, I don't know how, this is like a Popeye thing, if you know that reference, the character Popeye.
I was gonna say,
He used
Popeye
to
never
squeeze,
makes his
he'd squeeze it, and then it would fly into his mouth, and then he would get strung, right? Yeah, this can, if you ate this entire can, this would give you 50% of your sodium for the day. So that's another reason why we want to either contrast and compare canned spinaches if we have an option, or to rinse off what's inside as best we can and get rid of that extra brine, that salt water, to again get it down somewhat. Or maybe there is not that you can get frozen spinach. I take that back. Of course you can get frozen spinach. Maybe you look for frozen spinach if you really like spinach. Maybe that's the one thing you say, I'm going to splurge because I love spinach, but I'm also watching my sodium. I'm going to get frozen instead because it's cheaper than fresh and doesn't spoil as quick. So anyways, that's just a lot of information, and we don't have a lot of time for questions, so I apologize that we don't have that. So if you have any questions that I haven't answered, maybe you can give them to Diana, however you might communicate those things. I don't know if you have any
I'll
way
email
for,
Chris the question
yeah,
and I'll get the answer back to you.
there you go.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Thanks,
All
everybody.
right. Have a wonderful day, everybody.